Welcome back, boxing fans. The Canelo Alvarez David Benavidez story is building and building. And of course, now we have a lot of PBC fanboys trying to come to Al Heyman, PBC's rescue. You also have, of course, David Benavidez's team trying to cover for him. And this is consistently what we've always found out. People are always trying to direct everything towards Canelo Alvarez. We know, and that's come out over this period of time, that there was a three-fight deal signed and agreed to by Al Heyman and the PBC and Canelo Alvarez. Two of the opponents were Charlo. The other one, Errol Spence. And of course, when Errol Spence lost to Bud Crawford, that blew that whole scenario out of the water. For you and me, we were hoping David Benavidez would be the natural opponent to be put on as that third fight of the PBC card. It was a no-brainer, made tons of sense, especially after David Benavidez fighting both Caleb Plant and Andrade, only helping to build and foster and nurture that fight into a very big potential pay-per-view fight. But that wasn't written in the cards, not because of Canelo Alvarez, but because of David Benavidez's team, his promoter, Al Heyman, and his manager. These are the guys who got in the way of big fights being made for David Benavidez. We saw this last year when his manager came out and said an agreement had already been set between him and David Morrell, which came out to be just a lie. And even the manager came out afterwards to say that he didn't want that fight, so it didn't happen. David came out just after this information was released and said, this isn't true. I'm not fighting him. You have to listen to me. Don't listen to any of this other stuff because it's fake news. But yet this was his manager that was pushing this fake news, right? Then, of course, we had this $55, $60 million offer that apparently this so-called manager offered Canelo Alvarez and his team. Canelo's team came out and said, this is a lie. We've never had an offer from anybody with regards to a David Benavidez fight. Canelo just recently came out in an interview that he had with Eddie Hearn, and Eddie Hearn said that Canelo also admits that there has been no offers coming from David Benavidez's team. And people within the industry also stated the fact that, unless you heard the PBC say that this was the case, then you can't really believe that it's true. And Al Heyman and the PBC never came out to say they made an offer for Canelo Alvarez David Benavidez fight. What we did hear is they came out and tried to push for a Jaime Munguia fight for the second fight, even though Jaime Munguia is not their fighter. So they were looking for fighters not attached to the PBC at this point. Now, of course, it comes out that Canelo Alvarez obviously is going to be signing with Matchroom. So the no-brainer in this situation is obviously because he's signing with Matchroom, this means that David Benavidez fight is off the table, and only Berlanga and Munguia are potential opponents. And well, Munguia is a great fight and a fight that I'm looking forward to. And Berlanga is what it is. I mean, if it makes money, it makes sense. We'll have to see if it makes money. And then if it does, that justifies everything. If it doesn't, then it just shows that boxing fans are kicking back because they feel that he's not a legitimate opponent, as I and many other people do. He hasn't done enough to earn the fight, even though he's Puerto Rican. And we know the great Puerto Rican-Mexican rivalry obviously gets a lot of attention, and that's what they're banking on. But is that enough to sell a pay-per-view? I mean, Canelo Alvarez obviously has a big fan base, is a big name, but still, opponents matter. We saw that with Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia. When you make a great fight with solid opponents, the numbers are exceptional. When you put people in with subpar performers or opponents that nobody knows, then the numbers show that as well. They reflect the fact that the boxing public isn't that intrigued. I think David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant was a very good fight, but the numbers were not that great. And then he fought Andrade, who some people were acting as if Canelo Alvarez had ducked him, right, for years, and that he was a real threat that Canelo and his team were afraid to take on. Yet the numbers for that were also dismal. people were less interested in that fight than they were for Caleb Plant, a guy Canelo Alvarez already knocked out because, of course, he'd already been in the ring with Canelo Alvarez. So he had more name recognition than Demetrius Andrade did. So that understandably explains why the numbers were better for Plant than they were for Andrade. Now, of course, it comes out that Eddie Hearn has talked to David Benavidez' team and tried to negotiate for that fight, right? Just like he said he is. I'm not trying to get in the way of big fights. I'm happy to work with promoters to make big fights. So the onus now is on David Benavidez and his team to cross over to DAZN to make the fight with Canelo Alvarez. But his manager said, oh, as long as PBC and Amazon can have the rights for the American broadcast. Explain that to me, because I think it's funny because a lot of these PBC Canelo haters are going to come out and act like this is reasonable. Yet these are the same people that consistently are hypocrites. These are the same people that pushed Wrong Side of the Street for years when Errol Spence came out with that as a reason why he wasn't going to fight Terrence Crawford, Wrong Side of the Street. But these are the same people that ignored that when Canelo Alvarez and Charlo didn't happen in middleweight, because he was on the wrong side of the street as well. Charlo, he wasn't part of the DAZN team, and all the other titles were controlled by DAZN fighters. So Charlo was on the wrong side of the street. Ironically enough, Golden Boy still made him an offer, which of course the PBC and Al Heyman walked away from, as reported by Charlo's brother. So if you think I'm lying, I mean, why would Charlo's brother lie? What does he have to gain by exposing his brother? Now we get to the point where the reality is, if this fight is going to be made, it's probably going to be made on DAZN. How bad does David Benavidez want this fight? Because if you need to cross over to make the fight, you should cross fucking over, right? And this isn't me being unfair and hateful. We saw Devin Haney, who was with DAZN, leave DAZN to cross over to ESPN to get an opportunity to fight George Kambosos to become undisputed. Eddie Hearn didn't lock Devin Haney to DAZN and say, no. You can't cross over to ESPN. If we're going to make that fight, George Kambosos needs to come over and fight here. No, he didn't do that. He was more than willing to allow his fighter to cross over to ESPN to do what he wanted to chase that dream, that accomplishment of undisputed. So that's what Devin Haney did. He fulfilled his 3-fight contract with ESPN. And then, of course, because of this kind of mentality he has with a promoter who's open to letting him make fights on other networks, he, of course, came back to Matchroom. Because when you have a promoter who has your back and doesn't try to control your moves and understands the bigger aspects to the sport and what people want to accomplish and doesn't want to get in the way of these things, that's the kind of person you want to work with, right? And this is the same scenario we saw with Eddie Hearn and DAZN with Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez was a 3-belt unified 168-pound champion, the number 1 pay-per-view fighter in boxing, pound for pound number 1, and the face of boxing. So you'd ask yourself, who needs to cross over to fight who? Canelo Alvarez or Caleb Plant? But we saw what happened. Canelo Alvarez crossed over to the PBC for a 1-fight deal to become undisputed by fighting Caleb Plant over on the PBC, because he knew otherwise the fight would never get done, because this is consistently the PBC getting in the way of these kind of opportunities. So he crossed over, and Eddie Hearn allowed him to do that because he understood the significance. Canelo, of course, then came back and then fought a few more fights with Matchroom before signing the 3-fight deal to cross back with the PBC, right? So now the onus is on David Benavidez to cross over to DAZN to fight Canelo Alvarez for undisputed, if that truly is what he and his team want to do. You ask yourself, what does David Benavidez' manager have to gain by forcing his fighter to not get the fight? Because, of course, why would DAZN give up American TV rights to the PBC and Amazon so they could put it on pay-per-view in the States? Why wouldn't they just showcase the fight in the States and collect that money themselves, since they're the ones that are paying for the fight? But people are going to argue this and make it out as if somehow Canelo Alvarez and Eddie Hearn are getting in the way of the fight. But they're not the ones getting in the way of the fight. And no, there was no $55, $60 million offer from the PBC to make that fight. If that was a fight they really wanted truly to make, that would have been one of the fights on the 3-fight contract with Al Heyman. But it wasn't. It wasn't. So you have to ask yourself, how willing was Al Heyman to really make that fight to begin with? Because he didn't add that to the contract. Really, he was protecting his, first timers in the two Charlos and Errol Spence, giving them the bag before their retirement. Really, that's what Al Heyman was doing. So, much respect to Al Heyman. If he's your manager, you can see that he's taking care of you, because that's what he was doing for these guys. Unfortunately, Spence and Charlo dropped the bag, right? And left Al Heyman in a very uncomfortable, awkward position where now he had no potential opponents to fill those spaces according to the contract. So that's why Canelo Alvarez obviously just left and went back to Matchroom. But let's listen to David Benavidez, because it's ironic when fighters know the truth, but yet come out just for public opinion to try to push misinformation and fake news. Because this is a guy who says, I'm not fighting David Morrell. I never said that. And if I never said that, it's not true. But yet he knows what his manager fucking said. But he didn't address that, because this is the way these people negotiate, right? Fake news, social media back and forth, which is meant mostly to confuse boxing fans and to give them different perspectives so they don't know really who to believe. But the truth is, why would we believe David Benavidez's team when we've consistently seen this kind of MO from them? Now he comes out just after his manager said they offered $55, $60 million to Canelo Alvarez, which was reported to be fake news once again. This was kind of like the Deontay Wilder $55 million offer to Anthony Joshua. You got 5 days to sign, or the deal's off the table. You're not the fucking A side, and you're pulling deals off the table. So how legitimate is the offer to begin with? Well, we know it wasn't fucking serious at all. This was the same kind of negotiation they tried to get involved with Wilder and AJ, acting as if they were the A side. And AJ had to cross over to the PBC to make the fight. Why would he do that? Why would AJ cross over to the PBC? Right? He already had everything. Wilder was the one that was looking for that career high payday. And we saw how that worked out, because he took a cherry pick opponent and it ruined his career. And now he's an afterthought, just like Errol Spence is, just like the two Charlos are now. The PBC ship is sinking, because who's going to be carrying them forward over the next 5 years? Tank Davis, a guy who refuses to step up and take on legitimate opponents? If he consistently fights subpar opponents, his pay-per-view numbers aren't going to grow. They're going to continue to shrink. The one off is going to be the Ryan Garcia fight. And then after that, what? He's going to fight fucking Manny Pacquiao? Right? If that's the extent you're going to go, you're going to fight a 45-year-old, hoping that Manny Pacquiao's name can help you have a successful pay-per-view. Man, that's called desperation. Desperation. But let's listen to this from where are we? Here we are. My man, David Benavidez, on Ness's show, the box.
Obviously, big announcement. You're moving up to 175. I guess the biggest question for everyone is why announce a fight before Canelo announces that he's not picking you?
Well, to be honest with you, I've been wanting to go up to 175 for a long, long time. I've been the number one contender to fight for the WBC for 3 years already. My PBC and Al Heyman and Samson were negotiating. Canelo didn't show no interest to fight me, so like I said, I'm not going to be sitting around waiting for Canelo. There's still more weight classes to conquer. I've been wanting to go up to 175 for a long, long time. The winner of this fight is going to be the winner of the interim WBC belt, and that puts you in the number one spot to fight the winner of Bivol Beterbiev.
And again, more of this fake news. Why is the WBC creating another interim fucking champion? Just like the IBF did with Boots Ennis to get in the way of Bud Crawford. The WBC has a world champion right now, Artur Beterbiev, who's going to be fighting Dmitry Bivol this summer for undisputed, right? Like, I don't know if David Benavidez becomes the automatic mandatory because the winner of that fight is going to have 4 sanctioning bodies and potentially 4 mandatory opponents. For this man who's never fought at 175 pounds, it would seem kind of rude and unrealistic for him to somehow catapult to the front of that line, kind of like Edgar Berlanga jumping ahead of David Morrell for the WBA. And the irony is, people are going to continue to push this pro David Benavidez narrative. Not that they're supporters of Benavidez, because they're not. They're just anti Canelo Alvarez. And the irony is, they're going to act like him fighting Vostik is somehow some legitimate test and legitimate fight. Yet if Canelo Alvarez was fighting Vostik, it would be getting the same kind of cherry-picked negative attention that Berlanga is getting. The difference is Berlanga is a guy who's still undefeated, has never been knocked out, right? And didn't take 4 years retirement before coming back to the sport, which is where Vostik finds himself right now. This is the easiest path for David Benavidez to move to 175. I mean, if we look at the current rankings, I'd be curious to see where Vostik is even ranked in the other 4 sanctioning bodies. So let's take a quick peek just to put it in perspective. Because now, of course, the WBC is going to elevate him because that's what sanctioning bodies do, right? All of a sudden, because you're being talked about as a potential opponent for a big fight, all of a sudden now you become ranked. So, boxing scenes, boxing rankings. So let's check it out. So 168. Okay, so currently, Canelo Alvarez, Artur Beterbiev is the champion with Boatsi, number 1. Boatsi, who just won a fight to move himself into that position. Vostik, number 2. You ask yourself, how is Vostik number 2 by the WBC? I guarantee you 2 months ago, Vostik wasn't fucking ranked number 2. Yard, number 3. Callum Smith, 4. Albert Ramirez, never heard of him. 5. Dan Aziz, 6. Richard Rivera, never heard of him. Number 7. Let's look at the WBA. So they have Boatsi, Dan Aziz, Albert Ramirez, Yard, Rivera. Vostik is number 6. The IBF, Michael Eifert is number 1. That's probably going to be the fight mandated first. Yet people are going to say, who is fucking Eifert? And does anybody want to watch Beterbiev fight him? Boatsi, number 3. Jerome Pampaleone, number 4. Vostik, number 5. Vostik is highly ranked, which is ridiculous. It just shows you right now the light heavyweight division is much weaker than the 168-pound division. Because you listen to some of the names I've mentioned, nobody knows who these guys are. These guys are ranked this high on the rankings, yet they've never beaten another top fucking fighter. Boatsi, Vostik, Yard, Eifert, Alberto Ramirez, Adam Dienis, who Beterbiev already knocked out. Like, the rankings at 175 are pretty terrible. I'm just curious. Let's take a quick peek to see who Vostok has fought in his 2 comeback fights, because he came back after 4 years of retirement. And I don't know who he fought. I can't remember specifically, but I'm curious to know if it's anybody even ranked in the top 15 of these sanctioning bodies. Because this is the question people always have with these sanctioning bodies. How do they justify people and their positions? You would think people have to beat somebody to move up, but I don't think that's always the case. So currently, Vostok, there you are. 20-1, 16 KOs, knocked out once in his last. So he got knocked out in 2019, came back in 2023, faced Joshua Obano, 20, 34, and 2. I guarantee you that guy was not ranked. Richard Bolotniks, 19, 6, and 1, not a bad fighter. And Isaac Rodriguez, 28 and 4. So Isaac Rodriguez is the guy with the best rankings. Let's see exactly who he is. Isaac Rodriguez, 28 and 5 now, knocked out 4 times. So 5 losses, knocked out 4 of the 5 times, 22 KOs and 28 wins. Brazilian fighter, 39 years of age. So it tells you exactly who Vostok has fought. Fucking nobody, right? This guy got beat by Desmond Nicholson, who was 18-3-1, knocked him out in 6 rounds, and then fought a guy who was 3-7, a guy who was 4-0, a guy who was 10-23-4, then fought Richard Rivera, who you saw in the rankings, was 22-1, lost to him by unanimous decision, and then faced Vostok. Richard Rivera, this other guy who's ranked very high, 25-1, 19 KOs, 33-year-old American. I do remember seeing him fight before. He got beat by Badu Jack in 2022 by split decision, and then went on and faced guys that were 13-3-1, 28-3, 6-5, 17-8-1, and his next opponent is 8-0-1. So these are the kind of guys you need to fight to be ranked in the top 5 by these sanctioning bodies. Right? Yet Canelo Alvarez is being criticized for potentially fighting a guy who at least is marketable, who has 17 knockouts and obviously an undefeated record, and has fought far better opponents, even though his resume is not the best. But see, this is the fake news that people push in boxing. And of course, the people that are anti-Canelo, they're not going to be critical of David Benavidez and the subpar opponents he's facing. Yes, Vostok at one time was a world champion, right? And fought for unification, got knocked out and retired, and never planned to come back to boxing. Only came back to boxing because literally the war with Russia and the Ukraine obviously financially really affected him. So now he came back and fought 3 scrub opponents, and somehow fighting those guys, not one of whom was ranked in the top 15, has elevated him to number 2, number 4, number 5, and number 3 on the sanctioning bodies. This shit's ridiculous. But that's the kind of bullshit you get from these sanctioning bodies, where payola means more than actually doing work. But let's listen to more of David Benavidez, because David knows this is all cap. But of course, his premise is to continue to cap off his Canelo Alvarez until eventually he gets that fight and can get a retirement fight as far as the money that he's going to get. It was reported that Canelo's team offered him $5 million. And then, of course, he said, oh, Canelo's team then never hit us back. Is it the Canelo's team never hit you back, or your manager, who consistently lies, didn't address them after getting that offer because he felt it was too low, and obviously walked away from it, which would be probably more likely, right? And the irony is Tank Davis's next opponent is getting paid $1.2 million. $1.2 million to fight Tank Davis, the face of American boxing. David Benavidez was offered 4 times that amount of money.
So like I said, if he's not gonna want to give me the fight, there's nothing much I could do. So now I'm going up in weight. But I was speaking to Luis de Cubas, and Mauricio Suleiman said that they're going to see. If not, they might strip. They're going to see if Canelo still wants to fight in September, and if not, they'll strip him the belt. So, I mean, we're still going to see. But like I said, I'm not going to put my career on pause because somebody else doesn't want to fight me. So I'm going to go try.
And that tells you everything you need to know. That's what they're hoping for. They don't mind if the fight doesn't get made and there's no negotiation between the two teams, because they're really hoping that the WBC strips Canelo Alvarez so that David Benavidez, like Tank Davis, can inherit a title and become a 3-time 168-pound champion. They're not hoping to fight him. They want to get a title so then the PBC can say, oh, we have WBC 168-pound world champion David Benavidez. And of course, it's not us that doesn't want to make fights. It's Canelo Alvarez. The same narrative we heard them push for years with regards to Errol Spence and Bud Crawford. The same narrative we heard for years from Tank Davis's team, right? People wanted too much money. They priced themselves out. They wanted more than they're worth. It's always the other person that doesn't want the fight. We heard the same thing from Deontay Wilder. It was AJ and Eddie Hearn. AJ and Eddie Hearn, right? If you compare resumes between AJ and Wilder, it ain't fucking close. It ain't close. You can see who wanted that smoke, who went for the real work, and who consistently cherry-picked their way through their career.
Try to conquer other weight divisions and win other crowns.
Do you think it's going to be difficult for you to come up to 75 and then potentially come back down? And do you feel like you're opening the door for him to put you in a rehydration clause or a catch weight, have you go up and say, yeah, come back down and fight me now?
All this stuff that you're telling me, it might be a possibility, but like I said, I can't just think about what he wants to do. I could definitely come back down to 168, but I want to go up to 175. Like I said, it's been my dream to conquer other weight divisions and win all these belts.
So the question is, so you don't want to go over to DAZN to make a Canelo Alvarez fight, but yet if you beat if you beat Bozdik and put yourself in position for a potential fight with Benavidez and Bivol, one who's an ESPN fighter and one who's a DAZN fighter, ultimately you're going to have to cross over to their side of the street to make that fight as well. Because why would they cross over to the PBC? Especially now when they just fought in Saudi Arabia or are going to be fighting in Saudi Arabia for a career high payday. Why would they then go to the States, to a market where neither of them have gotten much love, to fight on a network that has no real support, to fight you in the States? Right? It makes no sense at all. You're walking away from the biggest fight possible because you don't want to cross over to DAZN to go to 175 to chase undisputed there, where you need to also cross the street to make the fight. Literally, David Benavidez has nowhere to go. His only hope is the WBC is going to strip either Beterbiev or Bivol or Canelo Alvarez and gift him a WBC title, which, don't be surprised if that's exactly what happens, because this is boxing. And you couldn't be surprised to see a sanctioning body muddy shit up by doing something fucking like that. And we've seen, of course, Suleiman and the WBC do that before. We've obviously seen it from the WBA. We've seen it from the IBF. Probably the only group that really hasn't done it to the extent of the other three is the newest out of all of them, the WBO. Probably the one group that has the best conscience. But at the same time with them, they've historically been in cahoots with Top Rank. So even they have their own issues.
I'm in a position where I'm not going to fight for all the world titles, and why am I still in this weight class? So we're going to take it one fight at a time, and we're going to go up to 175, see how we feel, and if we can come back down, we'll come back down. If there's no reason to come back down, I won't come back down. But if there's other big fights to be made, I will come back down.
Now, were you made aware that the opponent that you're going to face is an Eddie Reynoso managed fighter, and he's trained by Eddie?
No, I haven't. I didn't know that at all. I seen that he was training with Canelo's team, but that's the only thing I know about that. But like I said, if I can't get to Canelo, I'm gonna beat up everybody around in his team. We know we did Ellis, and now we're gonna do Alexander.
Now, knowing that, Eddie is involved, Reynoso, does that make you feel some type of way that he's willing to negotiate a fight with another fighter that he manages and not the one you really want?
I don't feel any type of way. Honestly,
And listen to this, Ness. Ness, you don't know what's going on as far as who's willing to negotiate with who and over what. Like the fake news that consistently gets pushed from these YouTubers is fucking ridiculous, right? And of course, when one person in the business tells you that ain't the case, then of course he's lying and not legitimate. But then a guy who consistently is full of shit and has been caught lying multiple times, what he says, obviously, then you have to roll with it. David Benavidez' team, his dad, his manager, consistently have fucking put out fake news. Everybody knows it. Everybody has seen it.
at the end of the day, it is what it is. I mean, I'm not bothered by what Canelo wants to do. Like I said, I'm not going to put my career on pause. If that's what he wants to do, then we missed out a big opportunity to make the fights happen for the fans. At the end of the day,
Listen to that. Then we missed out on a big opportunity. No, Canelo hasn't missed out on anything. If Canelo doesn't fight you, it's not really going to be a fucking blip in his career because you're not going to bring anything more than Jaime Munguia or probably even fucking Langa, right? Realistically. And then if Bivol and Beterbiev have a fight for Undisputed, they would be more than likely to take a Canelo Alvarez fight than to fight you, right? Specifically if it's a Bivol rematch for Undisputed, which would be on DAZN as well. And don't tell me that wouldn't be a far more likely fight for Dimitri Bivol to take than to take on you. Because the amount of money on the table for him to rematch Canelo Alvarez for undisputed 175-pound titles would be ridiculous. Whereas to fight you, where are they going to fight you? In the States, in Phoenix, is the undisputed champion from Russia going to go fight you in Phoenix, Arizona, or Vegas, right? Like some of the things people say just makes no fucking sense at all. And I don't hate on Benavidez because he's in a tough position. He's with a sinking ship with not much fucking leverage. And they don't have much faith in him because they didn't even put him on the contract. So what is he supposed to do? Stay busy, continue to clout chase, and keep your name relevant, keep your name tied together with Canelo Alvarez, and hope that somehow this is ultimately where you end up going, right? So you can collect the big payday. And I have no problem with that fight. That's the fight I prefer. That's the fight everybody wants. But for people acting like somehow David Benavidez is this boogeyman, it boggles my fucking mind because these are the same people that a few years ago said that Caleb Plant was the best fighter at 168 and would easily beat David Benavidez because Benavidez was just a flat-footed, limited Mexican fighter. Literally. And now those are the same people that are the biggest supporters in the world for him.
this is what we have to do for the fans. But if they don't want to do it, then it's out of my reach and out of my control. I can't do nothing about it.
Now, when it comes to Bivol and Beterbiev, obviously people are assuming that that's who you're lining up to face. But did you know that they have a rematch?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we're going to take it one fight at a time. I'm going up there to see. Definitely this is a hard fight. It's not an easy fight. The guy's only loss is to Beterbiev. And, he beat the Adonis Stevenson. So we got to be focused on this fight. Whatever comes after, I don't know. Just like I said, we take it one step at a time. We'll see what happens. We're going to win this fight, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Now, you're moving up. Is it just because of Canelo? You don't like the names Christian and Billy, David Morrell, Eric Baziana, none of those guys want to make you stay in the division?
Those are good names.
That's it, Ness. Hit him with some facts. Dave Morrell is an in-house PBC fight. Billy, fine, dangerous, maybe not to the same extent as Morrell. Hasn't established as much as Morrell. Bazinian, actually, I would think that would be easy work. But then even a potential, who are the other fighters? Pacheco, right? Obviously, he is on DAZN with Golden Boy, but he's a great opponent. Great, right? One of the most unheralded American fighters in the sport of boxing. So there's a lot of good names. I just told you who's at light heavyweight. Like, let's go over it one more time just to put things in perspective. So you're running away from 168, a stacked division, to go to 175, which is a fucking two-man division, literally a two-man division. There's nobody else in that division worth fucking talking about. Literally. So where are we? So here we go. So this is BoxRec rankings for light heavyweight. So you got Dmitry Bivol, Arthur Beterbiev, Joshua Buatsi, obviously not bad, but you know, a guy who walked away from a world title fight. Callum Smith, Vosdick. Don't ask me how Vosdick is ranked ahead of fucking Anthony Yard. Ili Isminov, Dan Aziz, Jerome Papillon, Malik Zinade, Robin Kreniski, Lyndon Arthur, Albert Ramirez, Vasily Votsekov, Michael Efford, and Anthony Yard is ranked number 15 by BoxRec, right? And if you look at this division in all seriousness, you got Buatsi, Yard, Bivol, Beterbiev, Smith. And really, that's about all. Those five fighters are really the crux of who is in this division worth talking about. Of course, we have Naji Lopez, who I was talking about yesterday, who is still quite a bit away from putting himself in this kind of conversation. But now let's go and look at 168 pounds, right? Just to put it in perspective, the options that are there. But that's fine, because he can move to 175 and say, I moved to 175 because Canelo wouldn't fight me. And then I went on a bum fucking tour, right? Literally. A bum tour. So now we go to 168. So you got Canelo, Benavidez, Munguia, Derevchenko, Christian Mbilla, Caleb Pant, Demetrius Andrade, David Morrell, Edgar Berlanga, Vladimir Shishkin. That's the top 10. Way better than 175. Olze Iglesias, number 11. Beck Melakuziev, number 12. Diego Pacheco, number 13. Eric Bazinian, number 14. And then after that, once you get down under number 14, then it becomes a little less stellar, even though you still have undefeated Cuban William Skull, Jesse Hart, a very good opponent, Kevin Lila Sadio, the tough Mike Tyson-esque French fighter that many people are talking about, Pavel Siliagin, also very highly talked about as well. So, you know, you could really get probably 20 people deep in that division, at least 15 legitimate fighters. And at light heavyweight, you got five. But let's listen to Eddie Hearn, because Eddie Hearn is also talking here about what's going on with Canelo, because people love to hate on Canelo. Well, let's find out what somebody that actually talks to Canelo and doesn't have an axe to grind against Canelo has to say.
Trust me when I say Canelo Alvarez will fight anybody, right? He will fight Benavidez. He's a guy that will come with everything to win that fight. He will put it on Canelo Alvarez, he will stand and fight with him. So will Berlanga, so will Benavidez. So in my opinion,
Canelo's boxing saga with the PBC and Eddie Hearn is a real showstopper. Rumors suggest he's avoiding David Benavidez for fights with Charlo and Manja, but that's not the full story. Eddie Hearn recently confirmed Canelo's ready for any challenger, even Benavidez. The hitch? A current snag in the PBC deal is holding him back. It all began with Canelo's mega deal with PBC, defending his belts against Jermall Charlo. In the chess game of boxing, Canelo's strategic moves are in play. In the bigger picture, Canelo eyes a bout with Jermall Charlo before wrapping up the PBC deal against David Benavidez. His aim? Facing tough opponents to solidify his spot in boxing history. Charlo, a solid middleweight champion, posed an intriguing challenge to Canelo.
And he did, because think about Charlo. People literally were defending Charlo not that long ago when it was being discussed about him being stripped by the WBC, and not stripped losing his title, but having an interim title, kind of like what they're doing with David Benavidez. So it's okay to have David Benavidez be an interim title, even though the real champion is active, both at 168 and 175. Yet he's the interim champion that they're trying to put in both of those weight divisions by the WBC. But the WBC wouldn't put Carlos Adames as the interim champion at 160 pounds. Explain that to me. How the WBC justifies not having Adames become an interim champion in a division where the champion has been inactive for over 2.5 years, right? But yet you can put David Benavidez as the interim champion, not at one weight division, but at two. You cannot justify any of this kind of shit. And the irony in this situation is people literally defended that because people said Adames should become the interim champion. Charlo should become champion in recess. That's not hating on Charlo. That's not stripping him of his title. It's being legitimate. If you're inactive and going through mental health issues, then allow the next guy to become the interim champion until you can come back and then challenge him and regain your title. And what this allows is the division to keep fucking moving forward. Does that sound unreasonable? No, of course it doesn't. But people use that to try to act as if people were racially persecuting Charlo and attacking him. And they justified him as a Canelo Alvarez opponent. They justified him consistently during his inactive period of time. Only when it was being discussed that he was a Canelo Alvarez opponent did it become, oh, now they're cherry picking him because he's fucked, because he's inactive, because he's mental, because he's broken, because he's not the same fighter he once was. Yet we were saying that about him almost ever since he moved to the middleweight division. He's had several fights where he looked shit. The best fight he had was against Derevchenko, which people said was probably the most dominant performance against Derevchenko, after obviously having Danny Jacobs, Golovkin, and recently Munguia all fight Derevchenko in very close competitive fights. Charlo was the guy that most convincingly beat Derevchenko. But yet he had questionable fights with other fighters, like Montiel, who went the distance with him and gave him some problems. Whereas Jaime Munguia knocked that guy out in like 2, 3, 4 rounds, right? So the reality of the situation is, if Charlo wasn't getting the opportunity to potentially fight Canelo Alvarez, these same Canelo Alvarez haters and fanboys and PBC dick riders would be saying that Canelo's ducking him. But once the fight looks as if it's going to get made and their narrative is going to be exposed, now they have to try to justify why it's not a good fight right now. It would have been a good fight, but not right now, right? And of course, if Canelo does something else and moves in a different direction, don't be surprised if the next news you hear is that, of course, he's ducking Charlo because Charlo is a bad man, right? Yet, you know, that's not what anyone believes. But what do you expect from these kind of people?
And Berlanga's talent, their current standing makes them less enticing options. Canelo matchups with James, pressing Canelo's ready. Hearn's recent statements counter the narrative, portraying Canelo as eager to face Benavidez, challenging claims of reluctance. Canelo's trainer, Eddie Reynoso, supports this, highlighting the lack of a formal offer from Benavidez' camp. Reynoso dismisses the avoidance narrative, focusing on logistical and promotional challenges. Speaking to ESPN Knockout, Reynoso denies any offer for a Canelo versus Benavidez fight, expecting more information about Canelo's next bout within a week. We're thinking about things. Being a big boxing star doesn't mean it's easy business. Searching for the best, info coming next week. He added, "We haven't shared details because some things are still in the works. We're busy not just in May, but also planning for September." He also dismissed the rumors that Canelo was scared of Benavidez. "It's really tasteless to say Canelo is scared. He faced Mayweather, took on Cotto, stood against Golovkin, and even went to light heavyweight against Bivol. The reality is, no big promoters offered me a fight against Benavidez." Canelo's willingness to face Benavidez is a statement about his legacy and consistent pursuit of challenges across weight divisions. Facing the young and skilled champion, David Benavidez, is another opportunity for Canelo to prove himself against the best.
And that's the case. Like, who really believes that Canelo Alvarez is ducking David Benavidez? Like, people just need to be honest with themselves. If you fought the level of opponents that Canelo has fought, obviously lost to Floyd and recently lost to Bivol, and then you act as if he's afraid to lose. Why would a man who's already got beat twice be afraid to lose? People that are afraid to lose are people who've never lost, right? Because they don't know psychologically how they would deal with loss. Because we've seen many people, when they lose, they crumble, they are never the same afterwards. But a guy who's lost, like a Canelo Alvarez or, a Lomachenko, obviously these are hungry guys that want to win, and that's what drives them. Taking these losses is only going to motivate them more. It's not going to break them, because these guys know who they are. They've already been through it. They've been in with great opponents, right? They're not untested, unproven, just the opposite. They've been tested. They are proven. So the reality of the situation is, I'm hoping that Matchroom and Eddie Hearn can make a deal with David Benavidez. But the writing on the wall, especially with the way David Benavidez's team has consistently connected with Al Heyman and before Showtime, right? Talking about how they were like, this was Showtime, even though they had no contract with Showtime. Now, of course, they're tying themselves hard with Amazon, yet they have no deal with Amazon. Heyman has a deal with Amazon, but that has nothing to do with them. They're free to fight on any network they want to fight on, right? And why wouldn't you try to take on the biggest, baddest man in boxing for Undisputed and Legacy, right? But sometimes it doesn't matter how much you explain things to people and how much black and white you give them and facts and truth. It just fails to seep in. And we're going to consistently see this back and forth going on, obviously, until Canelo Alvarez fights David Benavidez. It's going to be a lot more of the same. And when he fights Benavidez, then it's going to be a lot more of the different. But it's going to eventually be something the same, just with a different name. All of a sudden, then it's going to be him ducking Bivol or Better Biev winner or whoever, Morrell, right, who's being pushed into the mix right now, even though the only person who's blatantly ducked Morrell is David Benavidez. But you leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the weekend. Obviously, we got some boxing this week from Top Rank and DAZN. Of course, nothing from PBC, but that's becoming the regular. Leave your comments below. Do you think Canelo Alvarez is ever going to fight David Benavidez? Just say a yes or a no. Peace out.